Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. What happens when someone bulldozes your property after a judge tells them not to? Because I showed up to find my pasture wrecked, trees stacked like trash, the creek filled in, and a road cut almost a quarter mile through my land. They thought they could out-paperwork me, until one moment in a deposition changed the entire ending. And the fix the judge approved? Yeah, they didn't see it coming. I own 40 acres of land in what used to be a quiet rural area about an hour outside the city. It's nothing fancy, mostly pasture with some wooded areas, a small seasonal creek that runs through the property, and a couple of old outbuildings. I inherited it from my grandfather 15 years ago, and while I don't farm it commercially, I keep a few horses and rent out some of the pasture to a neighbor who runs cattle. It's peaceful, and that's exactly why I wanted to keep it. About 3 years ago, I started noticing increased traffic on the county road that runs along my property's western edge. Surveyors mostly. People in reflective vests taking measurements and planting those little colored flags everywhere. I didn't think much of it at first. The county was always doing something or other with the roads. Then one afternoon, a man in an expensive suit showed up at my door wearing the kind of smile that immediately made me suspicious. He introduced himself as a representative from a development company and said they were planning a new subdivision on the property adjacent to mine. He explained that they wanted to build a road that would cut through the corner of my land to provide better access to their development. "We're prepared to offer you fair compensation for the easement," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I told him I wasn't interested. My property was laid out the way it was for a reason, and I didn't want a road cutting through it. He kept pushing, talking about how it would only affect a small portion of my land, how the county would maintain it, how property values would increase with development in the area. I kept saying no. After about 20 minutes of this, he finally left, but something about the whole interaction bothered me. A few weeks later, I got a call from the same company. Different person this time, a woman, much more aggressive in her approach. She told me that the road was happening whether I liked it or not, and that I should take their offer before they pursued other options. When I asked what that meant, she got vague and ended the call. I probably should have called a lawyer right then. Instead, I just kept an eye on things and went about my business. 2 months later, I was doing my morning check of the property when I noticed fresh tire tracks leading into my back pasture. Deep tracks, the kind heavy equipment makes. I followed them and found survey stakes planted in a line that ran straight through the middle of my land. Not along the edge like the guy in the suit had suggested, right through the middle, cutting my property nearly in half. That's when I called a lawyer. His name was Tom, and he'd handled the estate paperwork when I inherited the property, so I already knew him. I explained the situation, and he told me to document everything with photos and not to touch any of the stakes. He said he'd look into what permits had been filed with the county. 3 days later, Tom called me back. He sounded angry, which was unusual for him. He told me that the development company had filed for and received approval to extend a road through my property. When I asked how that was possible without my permission, he said that the approval was based on documentation claiming they had already secured the necessary easements from all affected property owners. "But I never signed anything," I said. "I know," Tom replied. "That's the problem. We need to get to the county office and see exactly what they filed." The next afternoon, we went to the county planning office together. After waiting around for about an hour and talking to 3 different people, we finally got someone to pull up the records. Sure enough, there was an approved plan for a road extension. The approval was based on documentation showing they had secured easements from all affected property owners. Tom pointed out that I had never granted any easement. The clerk looked confused and pulled up a scanned document on her computer. There was my name typed at the bottom of an easement agreement with a signature above it, but that signature wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. Whoever forged it had apparently just scribbled something vaguely signature-like without ever seeing my actual signature. My real signature has a very distinctive loop in the first letter. This one was just a wavy line. Tom asked for a printed copy of everything, and we left. In the car, he told me this was more serious than a simple property dispute. This was fraud and possibly forgery. He said we needed to file for an emergency restraining order to stop any work while we sorted this out. 2 days later, we were in front of a judge. Tom presented the forged documents and copies of my actual signature from the property deed, my driver's license, and several other legal documents. The difference was obvious even to me. I'm no handwriting expert, but these signatures weren't even similar. The judge looked through everything, asked me directly if I had ever signed an easement agreement. I hadn't. and then issued a temporary restraining order preventing any work on my property until a full hearing could be scheduled. Tom also filed a criminal complaint for forgery with the county sheriff's office. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe they'd get fined, maybe someone would get in trouble, but surely they'd stop the construction. I was wrong. 4 days after the restraining order was issued, I got a call from my neighbor, the one who rents my pasture for his cattle. He told me I needed to get over to my property immediately. There was heavy equipment everywhere. I broke every speed limit getting there. When I arrived, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were 2 bulldozers, an excavator, and several dump trucks on my property. They had already cleared a path about 30 feet wide straight through my pasture. Trees were knocked over, pushed into piles. The ground was torn up, showing raw earth where grass had been that morning. A section of my creek, the small seasonal one, had been filled in with dirt to allow their equipment to cross. I was shaking with anger. I called Tom immediately, then called the sheriff's office. Then I started taking photos and video of everything, the equipment, the damage, the workers, everything. A deputy arrived about 30 minutes later. I showed him the restraining order on my phone. Tom had sent me a digital copy. The deputy went to talk to the construction foreman, and I could see them arguing. Eventually, the deputy came back and said this was above his pay grade. The construction crew was showing him permits from the county and my restraining order, and he wasn't equipped to determine which took precedence on the spot. He said he'd file a report and that my lawyer needed to get an emergency hearing scheduled immediately. He did tell the foreman that if there was a valid restraining order, they were risking contempt charges by continuing. He also told me to document everything with photos and video while he sorted things out with his supervisor. The construction crew kept working. I stood there filming everything, documenting every tree they knocked down, every pass the bulldozer made. By the time they stopped for the day, the road extended almost a quarter mile through my property. Tom got us an emergency hearing for the next morning. The judge was not happy. She had issued a restraining order 4 days earlier, and the development company had blatantly ignored it. Their lawyer tried to argue that there had been a miscommunication with the construction crew, that the order hadn't been properly transmitted to the site supervisor, various excuses. The judge didn't buy any of it. She issued a much stronger order. All work was to cease immediately. Anyone who violated the order would face contempt of court charges, which could include jail time. She also ordered the development company to have a representative in court the following week for a full hearing on the matter. The construction stopped, but the damage was done. My pasture looked like a war zone. Tom hired a surveyor to assess the full extent of the damage. The survey results showed that they had destroyed approximately 3 acres of my pasture, removed 18 mature trees, significantly altered a section of the creek drainage, which thankfully didn't trigger major environmental violations since it was a small seasonal creek that was mostly dry this time of year, and caused significant soil erosion that would continue to be a problem until it was properly addressed. The estimated cost to restore everything to its original condition was close to $40,000. That $40,000 was just for basic restoration, filling in the damaged ground, replacing topsoil, and replanting grass. It didn't account for the trees, creek restoration, or any preventive measures to avoid future problems. Tom filed for damages. He also pushed for the criminal investigation into the forgery to move forward. During the discovery process, we found out that a junior employee at the development company had forged my signature on the easement documents, apparently under pressure from his supervisor to get the necessary paperwork done. Both of them ended up facing charges. The next few months were a blur of hearings, depositions, and legal maneuvering. The development company tried every delay tactic imaginable. They challenged the validity of the restraining order. They argued that the damage wasn't as extensive as we claimed. They tried to argue that even if the easement was improperly obtained, they had acted in good faith based on county approvals. But during one of the depositions, something happened that changed everything. The development company's project manager was being questioned by Tom about restoration. The manager was getting increasingly frustrated with the detailed questions about how they planned to fix my property. Finally, he snapped. "Look, we're reasonable people," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "If your client wants to specify exactly how he wants his precious property restored, we'll follow his specifications to the letter. Every single one. Just put it in writing and we'll do whatever he says needs doing." Tom paused. I could see something shift in his expression. He asked the manager to repeat that. The manager, clearly annoyed, said even more emphatically, "Yes! Whatever restoration specifications he provides, we will execute them exactly as written. Happy now?" Tom looked at me with the slightest smile. Then he turned back to the manager and asked one more time. "So, to be clear, You're agreeing on the record that if my client provides detailed restoration specifications, your company will comply with all of them, correct? The manager practically shouted, "Yes! That's what I just said. Whatever he specifies, we'll do it. Can we move on now?" That was the moment. He'd just given us exactly what we needed. They had essentially agreed on the record to comply with whatever restoration plan I specified. Tom asked for a break and we stepped outside. He was actually grinning. "They just handed us everything," he said. "They agreed to your specifications, not reasonable specifications, not appropriate specifications, your specifications." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we're going to create the most comprehensive, expensive, permanent restoration plan that we can justify, and they just agreed to pay for all of it." Over the next few weeks, Tom and I worked with contractors, environmental specialists, and land management experts to create a detailed restoration plan. Every aspect of it was documented, justified, and designed to not just restore my property, but to prevent any future disputes or problems. The plan called for complete restoration of the damaged areas, new topsoil, reseeding with native grasses, and erosion control measures. They would plant 18 replacement trees, each carefully selected to match the species they had destroyed. The trees weren't quite as large as the mature ones they'd knocked down. Moving truly mature trees is nearly impossible, but they were substantial specimens, each 15 to 20 feet tall, and would cost a fortune to transport and plant properly. The creek drainage would be restored with proper grading and the addition of natural stone to prevent future erosion. All of this was standard restoration work. But then there was the fence. The plan called for permanent boundary fencing, not just a simple fence, but a substantial barrier that would prevent any future disputes about the property line. Tom hired a fencing contractor who provided an expert opinion that given the terrain, the length of the boundary, and the need for a permanent solution, a stone wall would be the most appropriate. 6 feet tall, professionally constructed with iron gates at 2 points for my access. The contractor submitted this as the recommended specification, complete with engineering drawings and cost estimates. The stone wall would run the entire length of where their road had cut through my property, nearly half a mile. It would be built on a proper foundation, constructed with local stone, and designed to last for decades. It would permanently mark the boundary between my property and any future development. And it would cost an absolute fortune. The development company's lawyer tried to fight it. He called the restoration plan excessive and punitive, but Tom was ready. He pointed out that the project manager had agreed on the record to comply with my specified restoration plan. He brought in expert testimony from the contractors explaining why each element of the plan was necessary and appropriate. He showed photos of the damage their unauthorized construction had caused. And then Tom played the trump card. He reminded the judge that this wasn't just about property damage. The development company had forged documents, lied to the county, ignored a court order, and destroyed my property. They had done all of this deliberately, knowing they didn't have permission. The contempt hearing happened within 3 weeks, which was actually fast for the court system. The main civil case for damages dragged on for a few more months after that as the development company tried every delay tactic imaginable, but eventually the judge ruled. She found the development company in contempt of court for violating the restraining order. She approved our restoration plan in its entirety, every single item, including the stone wall. She gave them 90 days to complete the restoration work to the exact specifications outlined in the plan or face additional penalties. The development company tried to appeal. That failed. They tried to negotiate a different restoration plan. The judge reminded them that their project manager had agreed to my specifications and that ship had sailed, so they had to do it, all of it. I watched as crews came in to restore the torn-up pasture. They brought in dozens of loads of topsoil, regraded everything, and installed erosion control measures. The creek drainage was carefully restored with natural stone placed to manage water flow and prevent future damage. They planted 18 replacement trees, each one carefully selected and positioned, with irrigation systems to help them establish. And then came the stone masons for the wall. I have to admit, watching that wall go up was incredibly satisfying. They started with a deep foundation, then began laying stone. Day after day the wall grew. 6 feet tall, solid and permanent, running the entire length of where they had illegally bulldozed through my property. The wall stretched for nearly half a mile, a permanent monument to their mistake. The iron gates were installed at the two access points, heavy and well made. The whole thing looked like it belonged on some estate in England, not on my little farm. But it served its purpose. No one would ever accidentally or deliberately cross that boundary again. The final bill came to just over $215,000. The development company had to pay every penny. Tom later told me their insurance refused to cover most of it because the damage came from willful misconduct. Apparently, forging documents, ignoring a restraining order, and bulldozing someone else's land is not the kind of thing insurers are excited to pay for. The criminal case did not help them either. The junior employee who forged my signature and the supervisor who pressured him both ended up convicted. The supervisor got the heavier sentence, and the company itself was fined by the county for submitting false documents. Their subdivision project took a hit too. The road they tried to force through my property had been planned as the main access route. Without it, they had to redesign the whole layout, build longer roads on their own land, and cut down the number of lots. From what Tom heard, the development barely broke even after the delays, legal bills, restoration costs, and redesign. As for me, my property is fully restored. The pasture grew back beautifully. The trees are thriving. The creek drainage works the way it should. My neighbor still rents the pasture for his cattle, and the horses seem to like the windbreak the wall gives them. And yes, the wall is still there. 6 feet tall, nearly half a mile long, built from local stone with 2 heavy iron gates. It looks like something from an old estate, not something you would expect to find on my little farm. But I love it. Sometimes I stand at one of those gates and look through at the subdivision beyond it. Rows of identical houses, tiny yards, paved streets, and everything they tried to build around that road they were so sure they could steal. They could have accepted my first no. They could have stopped when they realized I had not signed the easement. They could have obeyed the restraining order. Instead, they forged my signature, lied to the county, bulldozed my pasture, filled part of my creek, and then promised on record to restore my property exactly the way I specified. So I specified a wall, a very permanent one. I still get calls occasionally from development companies interested in buying my land or securing easements. I am polite when I say no, but I always make sure to mention that I have an excellent lawyer. The stone wall stands as a permanent reminder of what happens when someone tries to bully their way through private property. They wanted a road, they gave me the most expensive fence in the county, and I did not pay a penny for it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Many years ago, I worked in an office for a company at one of their satellite sites. For day-to-day work, we technically only needed to use one system because it did everything we were officially required to do. The problem was that it did not do everything we actually needed. I was one of the older employees and had been there before the shiny new bespoke software was rolled out. Because of that, I still had login details for the old system, which remained the backbone of about half of our head office work and fed into the information we could see. That old system was incredibly useful. It meant I could log in and access a lot of information we actually needed, but which some faceless executive had decided to exclude from the new system. So for the next 3 or 4 years, I would log in every couple of days and download a report or two. Those reports gave us information about buying, stock issues, and other things that I could then share with the rest of our site. It was not confidential information and we could technically do without it, but having it made life much easier. Think of it like getting a drink in the middle of the night. You can do it with the lights off, but it is a lot easier with the lights on. For years, we never had an issue, and no one complained. Then one day, one of the department managers found out that I was downloading reports from a system she was adamant only her team needed to use. She contacted information technology and had them revoke my access. Annoyingly, she did this without telling me. So the next time I tried to log in, I simply got an error message. Locally, we had no idea what had happened, so I sent a quick email to information technology. They told me that Karen had requested my access be blocked, so I emailed Karen to ask why, and all I got back was a short, curt response. You do not need access. If you need to know something, ask my team. I figured there were a few reasons for this. First, she was a power-hungry pain who liked controlling people. Second, she had been trying to expand her team, and I suspect that if she made 20 satellite stores run every query through her department, she could create the workload needed to justify hiring 2 or 3 more people, perhaps so she could give her best friend flexible working hours. Allegedly. Actually, there was a third reason too. She really hated me because I had called her out once and embarrassed her in front of the company directors. She lodged a complaint with Human Resources and demanded I be fired, only for the chief executive officer to tell them to withdraw it because I had done nothing wrong. I had named him as a witness to the event. So, malicious compliance time. The reports I downloaded were only 2 or 3 reports, 2 or 3 times a week. That does not sound like a lot, but those reports helped us resolve more than 50 complaints and inquiries per day. Now, since I no longer had access, I guessed we would have to email her team every single time. I told the rest of my team to run every query through me, and I would email her team. There were 3 reasons for that. First, I did not want anyone else getting in trouble because I knew this was going to make her explode. Second, I could filter the queries to make sure each one was unique, since we did sometimes get duplicate information requests. If her team had already answered something once, I did not want to upset them by making them answer it twice. And third, because I am petty, I wanted her to know it was me. She managed about a week. By day 3, she had contacted my manager to complain. By day 5, because I had not stopped and we still needed answers, she had a meeting with Human Resources and I received a cease and desist request. They asked if I could send one single email at the end of each day with all the queries in it. It turns out that if you email 6 people up to 50 times a day, eventually someone misses an important invoice and an entire shipment gets delayed, or worse, canceled. The upside was that within a couple of months, her team was restructured, with different members being given regional coverage. It also turned out that the reason her team looked so busy was because they were counting one job done by one person as 6 jobs, one for each person copied into the same emails. Apparently, you do not need a bigger team if you are honest about the work they actually do. Even better, the reports I used to download now have to be downloaded twice a week by each person on her team and sent out to the stores in their region. The other stores had simply decided that if they could not find out the answer, there was no reason to know it. For years, they had been answering queries with, "I do not know," so by accident we made their service better too. The next one is an entitled people story. I was returning home from a trip that I had cut short because of a family health emergency. The flight itself was pleasant enough, but mentally I was in a bad place. I did what I usually do in situations like that, kept to myself, said very little, put in my headphones, and started listening to a podcast during the 2-hour flight. Over the sound of the podcast, I heard someone speaking loudly in a pretentious, nasal voice. I pulled out my earbuds and heard a man arguing with a flight attendant. He was complaining that he had asked for something several times and still had not received it. I did not really care and tried to ignore him, but he kept going. He asked the flight attendant for her name and said the airline needed to hear about this. I do not remember exactly what he wanted, but it was some kind of drink they did not have available for whatever reason. I put my earbuds back in and raised the volume. 10 minutes later, according to the podcast timer, he was still ranting in that same annoying voice about professionalism, respect, and giving customers what they want. I switched to rock music to drown him out, and then I saw the captain come over to talk to him. The man was flailing his arms around like spaghetti. At that point, my worry about my hospitalized grandmother started turning into anger. I began imagining all the different ways I could shut him up. The captain eventually walked away looking frustrated, and the flight attendant returned to serving the other passengers while ignoring the man's attempts to stir up more trouble. I think they brought him some alternative drink, but he never touched it. We landed, and I put my earbuds away so I could get ready to leave. The man was first in line by the airplane door, and I was right behind him. When the door opened, an airport security guard was standing there to escort him through the jet bridge. I followed behind them. At the end of the jet bridge, a higher-ranking guard was waiting. The man stood there blocking the way out, and I could tell the passengers behind me were just as fed up as I was. This guy had not shut up for more than half the flight. He kept arguing about how terrible the crew and service had been and how he had never experienced service this bad. He kept saying he needed to leave because his family was waiting for him or some other excuse that did not really matter. My anger was starting to boil. I had to go straight to the hospital and everyone behind me had places to be too. For a second, I thought about shoving past him or banging my rolling bag into his leg. But this was not just about him. It was also about who I am and what kind of person I want to be. So I took a couple of deep breaths to calm myself down while he kept telling the guards how to do their jobs. Then, with the most aggressive tone I could manage through my stress and exhaustion, I spoke up. "Get out of my way." That was enough to stun him. Everyone else had been following the polite code of conduct required by their jobs, but I did not have that restriction. For the first time since I had noticed him, he had nothing to say. The guards took advantage of his silence and started moving him away, hopefully towards some back office where he could be delayed for a few hours. I left the airport and headed home for a quick shower and a change of clothes before going to the hospital. My thoughts kept drifting back to that entitled man and how comfortable he was being rude to people whose jobs required them to stay polite. Politeness does not always work with people like that. Sometimes they need to hear from someone who is not being paid to smile at them. The next one is an entitled parent story. Hi, I did not really know where to post this, but I figured this might be the best place. I am an 18-year-old woman, almost 19, and I have been talking to my friends about this a lot. At this point, I feel like I need an unbiased opinion on the situation. For context, I do not talk to my biological father or that side of the family. The parents I am talking about here are my mother and stepfather. They are the biological parents of my 3 younger sisters. My relationship with my parents has always been rocky and very back and forth. I graduated high school last year and moved away to a university in the fall. Before I left, my mom told me she would help co-sign a loan, but after I graduated, the responsibility would be entirely mine, and she would not help me at all. My mom does not have any student loans because her parents paid for her entire undergraduate degree. She also will not allow me to ask my grandparents for financial help, even though they have offered. The week after my family dropped me off at college, they went on an expensive vacation and did not tell me about it at all. When I found out, they said I should be grateful they helped me move in and that I got to go to college, so my sisters needed something for them. I let it go at the time, but that trip comes up again later. During my first semester at college, I struggled a lot with my mental health and my grades were extremely low. I had struggled before, but college amplified everything. Over the course of the semester, my mom wore me down and convinced me to come home because I was struggling and could not afford it by myself anymore. I transferred back home to a local community college, and I am doing much better now. I am on better medication, in therapy, and my grades have improved a lot. Since transferring home, though, my parents have done nothing but criticize what I am doing with my life. Working a part-time job multiple days a week, going to school Monday through Thursday, and keeping top grades is still not enough for them. They constantly tell me I should be grateful they let me move back in and that I need to start paying rent or helping more around the house. Right now, I share a room with my youngest sister, who is more than 10 years younger than me. My old room was given to one of my other sisters about a month after I moved away to college. I do help around the house. I do laundry, dishes, take care of the dogs, and help with other housework. I also constantly bring things to my mom at work and to my sisters at school. I pick up my youngest sister from school every day before I go to work. Recently, I was also informed that I would be driving one of my sisters to a day program multiple times a week. This is on top of all the driving I already do for work and for my other sister, all without any assistance from my parents. The biggest recent issue is that my parents left me home alone for a week over a holiday so they could take my sisters on another vacation. If I had gone with them, my mom told me I would have to pay almost $1,000 for my tickets because they would not cover them. I did have school and work, but I was still upset about being left alone. My mom refused to really talk to me about the vacation, and when she did, it seemed more like she was trying to make herself feel better than actually hearing me. During that vacation, they made an incredibly large purchase while also telling me they had no money and asking me for help. At the same time, I am constantly under scrutiny from them and have strict rules. They have called me an alcoholic simply for going out with my friends one night a month. They call me fat when I go out to eat and say I waste my money on stupid things. Overall, I think I am a pretty good kid. I keep straight A's. I paid for this past semester of college myself, and I have a scholarship that covers all of my tuition. I have my own car, which I paid off myself, including the title, registration, insurance, and gas. I pick up my sister from school every day, and I work 5 days a week. I pay for groceries and help drive my sisters around if my parents are working late. I also help watch my sisters and their friends. Of course, this is not all the information. Other situations have also made me feel this way. My parents have left me to fend for myself some nights while taking my siblings out to dinner. My youngest sister constantly hits and screams at me, and my parents allow it. I have given my parents money and never received any of it back, and if I ask for it, I get yelled at. If more context is needed, I am willing to provide additional examples. I just feel like I have become a third parent to my younger siblings, and I do not know if I am overreacting or if my parents really are not treating me fairly. The next one is an entitled parent story. I am 23, male, and I am currently paying my mom $500 a month in rent. When I brought up the idea of having a written agreement or contract because of the personal tension between us, she laughed in my face and said $500 was nothing. She also said that if I wanted a strict landlord-type relationship, then maybe she should raise the rent and add whatever clauses she wanted. For context, I am currently back home after spending 6 months in jail for doing dumb things and trusting the wrong people. I will not get into the details, but part of why I ended up around those people was because I was desperate at the time. My mom had been threatening to kick me out, and the stress of that situation pushed me into a bad place. I have moved on from that, and have been back home since October 2025. I had trouble finding a job at first, but I was searching constantly because my goal was to get away from her. Around February, I finally found work, and almost immediately trouble started again. One major issue is that my mom is a micromanaging control freak. She guilt trips people and lashes out whenever anyone tries to create boundaries. It is also worth mentioning that we are West African, specifically Togolese, and we are all citizens living in Texas. My family is very religious, and my mom always has to be right. She is extremely argumentative, and everything turns into a power struggle. Not even a week into my new job, I came home after a shift and found my 14-year-old sister terrified and crying while my mom stood over her with a belt. She was forcing my sister to learn how to braid hair so she could eventually help her at her shop. My sister knew how to braid the ends, but she did not know how to start at the roots, and her hand was hurting. When I asked my sister if she was okay, she burst into tears. My mother lunged at her with the belt, trying to hit her. I pushed my sister out of the way, caught the belt, and told my mom to let go. She refused and told me not to undermine her authority. Eventually, I let go and tried to talk to her calmly, but she was already agitated and wanted to escalate the situation. Because I am on probation, I have to keep my probation officer informed. My mom told me to leave, so I told my officer what was happening. I also mentioned that maybe a visit from Child Protective Services was necessary because I did not feel safe leaving my little sister and brother there to deal with it alone. I am usually the only one in the family who stands up to my mother. My father is dead, and even when he was alive, he never really stood up for us. My older brother is either always on my mom's side or fence-sitting. When I told my older brother what happened, he said I was out of line and laughed about the whole thing. He said my sister never listens and does things like not cleaning all the dishes in the sink. I was confused because none of that makes what my mother did okay, and it definitely does not justify her actions. After things cooled down, it became clear that I was not being kicked out, but I would no longer be getting any help. I do not have a car, and my job is about 10 minutes away by car, but about an hour and a half away on foot. So from that point on, I was fully on my own financially. Since that incident, I have wanted nothing to do with my mom. I cannot leave yet, but I have kept my probation officer updated on every development in my situation. Thankfully, she has been very cool and understanding. Then my mom brought up rent. I was okay with paying rent. At first, she said I needed to pay 2 bills, but then she changed it to a flat $500 a month. I agreed because that seemed fair, especially since I had a better full-time job. Fast forward to now. I have become cold with everyone in the house because after all the fighting I have done for my siblings, they always turn on me or act like I am doing too much on their behalf. So I stopped engaging with all of them. My mom and I do not talk unless it is about bills, except for when she gives me unsolicited advice, which I ignore. I pay for my own food, transportation, clothes, phone bill, and everything else. I am currently trying to save for a car, but that has been difficult. I am still trying. Today my mom tried to scold me for not telling her good morning. I responded that if it was not about bills, there was no discussion to be had because she is nothing more than a landlord to me. I also have a backup housing option approved by my probation officer in case I need to move quickly. In response, my mom got snarky and said that if this was what I wanted, then I would get exactly what I asked for. She knew that would make me feel guilty, but I need to stand my ground. I only feel guilty because I have spent years trying to let things slide. But when no one else holds her accountable, I end up being the one to do it, even if she is my mother. She has said and done horrible things in the past, things I know I will probably need therapy for one day, but everyone around her keeps making excuses for her. Now she laughs in my face and says I must be crazy if I think $500 is enough for one room and living in her house. For context, I barely leave my room. I cook my own food, clean up after myself, go to the gym, go to work, and keep to myself. I do not bother her or my siblings. I leave everyone alone. Now suddenly $500 is small change to her. We live in a nicer part of Katy, so yes, it is a nice house, but she constantly complains about the price. She threatens to leave or move, almost like she wants to use that against me, but at the same time, she does not actually want to sell. She keeps putting money into the house through long-term financial commitments like air conditioning replacement, renovations, and other projects. I am just wondering if I am in the wrong here. Should I be paying more? Am I being unreasonable for wanting boundaries? I mostly just need someone to tell me that I am not insane and that my feelings are valid. Anyway, thank you for watching.